It is a new year, and a lot of schools are already starting to welcome their students back into the classrooms. And to talk a little bit more about what's happening in his district, Ben Kirby, the superintendent for Lake Orion Community Schools. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I appreciate being here, and thanks for having us.
So we talk with so many various superintendents throughout Oakland County. Every single district has a different plan but I believe your students returned on the 19th. Is that correct?
That is correct. We do have the in-person option for all students, all levels. We have multiple programs running, but yes, everybody started again last week.
So when you say the in-person option, I know there are some hybrid programs going on as well. Fill us in on the details of that.
So when I say in-person option, I'm referencing those students that chose to come into the school buildings and receive their instruction and their learning, with their teachers. We run a Dragon Virtual program as well. And we've been running the Dragon Virtual program all along. That has run concurrently with our in-person and remote option. Our in-person and remote are together as one option. Our Dragon Virtual is a second option. Really, the Dragon Virtual is a program that allows families to have consistency because they would be in this program all year long, and they wouldn't be as impacted by the ebbs and flows that the pandemic has created. But as far as the in-person option, we do have multiple things going on. Would you like me to explain how our students currently are in the in-person option?
Yeah, because elementary is in person, but it's afternoon, like morning, afternoon. But then at the do you have junior high school, and then their part days? How is that working?
Yeah, so we're doing something that's a little bit unique compared to what others were doing. And we're doing that based on what we learned when we had our students in person in November. We were privileged to have our students back, actually, our elementary students, we started back, I believe it was October 25th, and we had them in the in-person option for 3 weeks. And then we had our secondaries join them in the month of November, and they ended up being in for 1 week. But during that point in time, that allowed us to learn what some of our successes and challenges were for the in-person instruction. And we learned that there were some issues at the elementary as far as classroom or the lunches. When students were eating lunches, those were exposure issues, which, we recognized that going in, but then had some strategies and whatnot. But because of the number of students, at that point in time, we were serving over 80% of our students in an in-person option, and the ability to, get the social distancing, we looked at that as one of the issues. So when we brought students back, we made some changes with that. One of the other things that we recognized is that when we had our specials teachers go from room to room in our elective classrooms, that created some exposure issues. So if one of those elective teachers, say, was COVID positive, then they potentially could impact 3-4 classrooms. All those classrooms would have to go to remote. So what we did is we looked at how can we try to provide the most continuous schedule for our elementary students. And we did that by looking at a morning session in person for those that chose the in-person option. So what that means is our elementary students get a 4-hour and 15-minute morning session, and they are in person, and the focus is on the core and IEPs for those students with IEPs, but the focus is on the core. And then students would, as they leave, we'll use Monday for example. So they leave on Monday at approximately 12:15 or 12:45, depending on if they're an early start or a late start, which, we had to manage all the busing and everything too. But when a student leaves on a Monday afternoon, they get their lunch for that day in a grab and go setting. So, a paper bag, lunch to go if they choose to get lunch, but they also get their breakfast for the next day for Tuesday. So they grab, 2 meals, they go home either through our transportation or their own family transportation or their walkers. They go home, they eat their lunch at home, so we don't have the exposure potential at school. And then in the afternoon, we have in their Seesaw accounts some independent activities that they can do with their families. So they can do those immediately after lunch. They can do it before lunch. They can do it at 7 o'clock at night. But it gives some autonomy to families as to how they want to continue the education. And so the afternoon session is a remote, and it's asynchronous. And so they do that with their families. It's the specials, and it's social emotional learning that we're putting in their accounts.
Ben Kirby with us here on the MegaCast. He's the superintendent for the Lake Orion Community School District. With that, like, speaking with you is fascinating to me because I'm thinking about behind the scenes. What is it like for you and members of your staff to even try to remotely come up with such a plan?
It's tremendous work. I mean, we're 85% of what we're doing is managing and leading through this pandemic and making sure that we're coming up with programs that can provide consistency. And that's really what we're trying to do with what we're doing. We're trying to put together a program as we move forward here with the information that we've learned from our experiences and other districts around us, how we can keep people in school in the in-person option. So that's really why we're doing what we're doing. And we really hope that this is the minimum and that we will only move forward from here. But the amount of teamwork has just been exponential. I've got a great team that I work with, not only the leadership team, what we call our cabinet, those, my assistant superintendents, but our principals and other teacher leaders. I mean, people are continuously communicating. I've got a communication cycle that I do weekly that I'm sure we'll talk about here, but it's just constant. It's talking about the successes, it's talking about the challenges, and also what are some of the silver linings of this pandemic that we want to make sure we don't lose. So when we have school in 2 years from now, 3 years from now, we continue to use some of these things that are become best practices that we never even thought of, prior to the pandemic.
Because I am thinking about what would these conversations have been like pre-pandemic if you went to your families and your students and members of the union to say, hey, we want to start doing this online program. I
Sure.
would imagine they would have thought you were crazy at that time, right?
Pretty much. I'm pretty convinced they think I'm crazy now, but it has allowed us, this pandemic has allowed us to jump over some hurdles that we probably wouldn't have leaped before. And our teachers, our staff, our support staff, everybody's just been wonderful. This has just been a really trying time, and our community's been great. I mean, certainly there is a tremendous mix and a divide as to who wants in person and who thinks that the virus, is going to be transmitted in schools and who doesn't. But the teamwork has just been amazing. And we have accomplished some things that, 3 years ago, if you told me we were going to be, providing, Dragon Virtual in the format that we're doing, I would have said, probably not. Maybe in 5 to 7 years if we really are aggressive, because schools are traditionally slow to change. It's pretty traditional in most school districts.
But with that, we are here and we are having to make some of these changes. But as you mentioned as well, it's about consistency. Are you worried about being able to provide some of that consistency as the students return to in person during the pandemic? Because what if we have another surge?
Sure. So as far as worry, no. As far as make it a focus, yes. We really try to. So what we did with our structure, and we've really only talked about the elementary, but what we did with that structure is we removed some of those times that were causing us to have to switch back to remote, meaning learning from home with their teachers. So it's been very intentional with what we've been doing. We're taking small steps. We're doing it in that way so that we don't have to work our way backward, outside of MDHHS rulings or, the governor telling us it's going to take a lot of operational interruption in order for us to switch back to a remote. In November, when we had to switch back to a remote setting from our in-person setting, at the end of that week, we had, I believe it was 17 classrooms that had to switch full classrooms back to a remote setting. after this last week that we just did across the district, we've had 2. We had in November, we had 80 some staff members that were in a quarantine issue. This particular time we're at less than 10. So things are better. And so I don't worry about it, but we do think about those things as we plan forward.
But with that too, right now, the focus right now is about the vaccine. And there are some school districts across the country that the teachers are basically saying, we're not going back into the classroom until we have the vaccine. What is the conversation there at Lake Orion regarding your teachers and support staff with the vaccine, and also their availability right now to be able to get it, because we do know it's scarce?
Sure. And, we're just flat out blessed with our labor groups. Everybody's trying to figure out how we can provide, in-person instruction, Dragon virtual instruction to the best that we can with our students. We certainly have staff members who feel it very important for them to have a vaccine for their health and safety. We don't have a formalized, group that's saying we're not going back into the classroom until we get the vaccine, because we've been working. My human resources and our teaching and learning assistant superintendent meet with our teachers union group on a weekly basis, and they're talking about issues, and they're part of the decision making, and they've made some recommendations to help us think of how we move forward with students. And then I meet with all the labor leaders on a monthly basis, and giving them updates and getting feedback from them. So with that continuous communication, it has really helped us stay on the same page and make our steps forward and try to reduce our steps backwards. So just blessed with our labor groups.
Yeah, we've all learned that communication is key throughout this crisis. Even when that communication is, we don't know, at least you're, sharing that you are still trying to figure things out with the rest of the team as well. Ben Kirby with us here. He's the superintendent for the Lake Orion Community Schools. And, superintendent, before you go, I have to ask you, a big snowstorm is on the way. Students are now going back to the classroom. Are snow days going to be back on the menu now? Or is it like, nope, it's a snow day. Virtual class is the way you're going?
Yeah, so big is relative, right, as far as the snowstorm. So we have a weather call later today to hear from a meteorologist as to the impacts in our area about that. But as far as snow days, one of the things people need to understand and realize is that when we have I'll use our Dragon Virtual, for example, that's the program where kids are learning, via the computer, and the teachers are on the other end, but they're not coming in. They're not in person, but a lot of that staff is coming into the building to provide their lessons. So they still have a travel issue if there is inclement weather. But what we're looking at is the idea of a traditional snow day is still there, because we've got travel issues, whether it's in person or it is, the Dragon virtual teacher going to teach from their classroom. What we do have that we will be looking at is if we know there's a impending storm coming, and we can, with certainty, with the weather forecast, approximately 36 hours or more, we know that storm is coming, then I'm comfortable switching us to a remote setting for the designated days that it looks as though we're going to have hazardous weather. I'm not going to do that in the morning and say, hey, we're going to do remote on, like Wednesday morning. I'm not going to say we're going to do remote for today's lessons because the weather's poor. But if on Monday afternoon, it's very clear by 3:00 that Wednesday is going to be a tremendous travel issue, then I'm comfortable with making Wednesday a remote day. So that's how we'll proceed. And we're actually going to send out some communication to our families today to clarify. As you mentioned, there's some pending weather this evening going into tomorrow, just so that everybody's on the same page. But like tonight's issue, it's going to be we're going to be up with the roads 2:33, 4:00. We have different people doing different areas of the district checking to see, but the traditional snow day is still alive and well, but it's going to have a companion with the remote.
Well, thank you for that perspective because this is something so many people will be wondering, but also questioning as
Sure.
well as the snow comes in. With that, Mr. Kirby, he is the superintendent for the Lake Orion Community Schools. We so appreciate your time. Maybe I didn't touch on anything that you want to add before we let you go.
I guess I would just mention too, when we talk about the snow days, that like every district makes their own decision. So not everybody's going to operate the same way as we are with the remote. They may or may not look at that option. We feel compelled to try to get as much education as possible for our students, certainly within that pandemic. I would also want to mention that we've had great community collaboration. I've got a local medical group that I've been meeting with on a weekly basis that's been giving me feedback about the students and the families that they're servicing and how our programs are impacting them. And then, certainly I've got a group of teachers I meet with on a weekly basis. So communication has just been at a very high level, and that's really helped us. And so, we're very blessed in our community that people understand the importance of education and not a lot more to interject other than that we do have all of our secondary students in a hybrid format. We didn't really touch on that. The hybrid is basically every other day. Students are coming in person, and on those off days, they're getting asynchronous or independent lessons from our teachers.
So many facets to this conversation and the education process as we continue through this crisis. Superintendent, we so appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. Make it a great day.